This is a story based on true events that occurred only a few months ago. I may never forget this short yet amazing experience. It all began at my friend Chantel's house. In short terms, her family is familiar with the supernatural. I don't know much of the details, but I know that this has influenced her as well. She told me stories of bad entities living in her house, even in her room. But now her room is being protected instead of tormented by a kindly ghost. This is how our story starts. I saw this ghost. One night, I was sleeping over her house. A few weeks back. Finally, very late I may add, we went to bed. We were reduced to one bed, but we were fine with it. I slept on the edge of the bed, but I didn't feel comfortable the whole night. I felt as though something was in the room, like something was on the edge. Eventually, I fell asleep but was awoken by something. An image of a ghost. He seemed to be floating over the edge, or just managed to fit. But he seemed comfortable laying on the bed. He was tall, with his hands placed neatly over his chest. His head turned towards me, his whole body covered in a light blue glow. I couldn't see his face or the clothes he wore, but the outline of his short hair was shining. You probably won't believe me that a glowing figure was laying next to me, and this is no joke either. He was glowing brightly, so bright my eyes had to adjust to it. I was happy he was here. I was happy I was able to see him. For some reason, I wasn't concerned at all about the appearance of this ghost. I was totally at ease the entire time he was looking at me. I felt as though he may be smiling. I couldn't help but smile as well. I know it wasn't a dream. It felt hazy, the whole experience a bit dreamy, but I know it was real. I remember my thoughts of the event. I remember my reaction and turning my head back to my sleeping friend beside me. She was asleep the entire time. I also remember waking up in the morning and seeing that he wasn't there. I had this familiar feeling, like when you wake up from sleep with an older sibling or parent in their bed and you wake up and they're gone. It's a strong feeling of loneliness. As we were having breakfast, I told Chantel of my experience. She nodded her head, replying that she obviously believed me, and that I was the only one of her friends to ever actually see him. My friend then told me how she saw him in a vision of his life and even how he died in pictures. But no one, besides myself, had ever actually seen him. Even there, talking about how strong the sensation of safety was almost brought me to tears. It was a happy and amazing feeling this ghost has brought me. This feeling of protection and security. I wish to see him again someday soon, this young kind soul. He watched over me like a big brother, and I promised to him I will be his sister. I also want to know more about this. Has anyone ever experienced anything like this? Do good ghosts glow like he did, a light bluish white? Was he actually good, or were his intentions possibly fine? I would appreciate your comments or questions if you have any. I'll answer truthfully. I promise the story is completely 100% true. It was August of 2000 when my husband and I moved to our new house. It was a beautiful old colonial that dated back to the mid-1860s. We had 2 children at the time, and our third was born 3 years later. We were in love with the house and the property. It sat on an acre of land. It had a detached barn that was about 20 years old. We also had a 2-bedroom apartment that was attached to the house, which would serve us well for extra income. The main house that we lived in had 3 floors. It was perfect for our family. My first experience was around Easter of 2002. It was late, around 11:30 p.m. when I was in the kitchen, playing Easter Bunny by getting the kids' baskets ready. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular when all of a sudden, I had this cold chill go through me. I looked up from what I was doing and saw this black mist circle around the kitchen. And then it just quickly disappeared. It scared me so bad that I quickly finished what I was doing and ran upstairs. My husband was already asleep and I just jumped in bed and curled up beside him. I never saw that mist again. My next experience happened a couple of months later. It was about 2 in the morning and I woke up to the sound of my oldest John, who was 9 at the time, talking to my youngest son, who was about 2 at the time. I can hear them talking and laughing. They were laughing so hard that it was making me laugh. Because it was so late, I got up to check on them and tell them to go back to bed. But when I went into their room, the baby was sound asleep and my oldest was in his room, sound asleep as well. I was definitely freaked out. The baby's room was before mine, and my son John's room was on the 3rd floor, and he would have had to walk right by my room. There have been more than one occasion that I would wake up with my bed shaking. Not violently, but enough to get my attention. I would also wake up to the sound of footsteps in my room, and I would look around and no one would be there. There were also times that I would just be trying to fall asleep and would get this chest-tightening, anxious feeling that would make me afraid to turn over, in fear that I would see someone staring at me or standing beside the bed. Other things happened to my children as well. It was never anything physical, but they would hear their names being called. One day, it was around October of 2006, it was cold out that day, so I left my 4-year-old home with John, my oldest son, who was 13 at the time, so I could pick up Jeremy from school. The school was in walking distance from the house. The boys can see me walking from the window in my son's room, and they said that they were watching me. Behind them, coming from the bottom of the stairs, they could hear me calling them individually by name. They got scared because they knew it wasn't me because they were watching me from the window walking down the street. I lived in that house for 12 years. I have so many other experiences to share, but we'll do so another time. In the early 1950s, in the city of Nashua, New Hampshire, there was an incident at the Black Bridge, which was located on a stretch of railroad track, not far from the Hudson Bridge, which is the next town over. My great-grandmother, who lived directly across from the tracks, was present when a train derailed and crashed into a nearby building. The bridge was practically torn into pieces and many people died, and almost all who lived were scarred for life. My great-grandmother told my father, when he was very young, that some of the passengers crossed the field to her house. Being the kindly woman she is, she didn't turn them away, and helped them. One man, according to my great-grandmother, had the skin off of his back missing. But she said that he was in such tremendous shock that he didn't even seem to be aware of it. Sadly, many children perished in the wreck. Many years later, me and my family lived on the street that runs down a long hill and comes to a stop at the Black Bridge. Me and my friends named it that because it was as black as pitch. To this day, the laughter of young children can be heard, as though they are playing under the bridge, but nobody has ever seen. Apparitions and the ghost of suicides haunt the area as well. Go to the bottom of Lock Street and you will find out for yourself. My story takes place in Concord, New Hampshire, the capital of the Granite State. I was born and raised in this city and care very much about it. I spent my entire childhood and teenage years in an apartment on the 3rd floor of a 100-year-old brick building. I was an atheist, as well as my parents, who are about 4 decades older than I am. We lived in that apartment quite happily for 20 years with nothing strange ever happening. That is, until my girlfriend, now wife, moved in when we were 18 years old. Like I said, I was an atheist and had always had been, so I did not believe in ghosts or demons at all, but she was a Christian and made this known to all she came in contact with. I guess you could say she was a passionate Christian. It all began when the complaints from Crystal, my girlfriend, that she had been woken up in the middle of the night like she always does, usually just for a minute or two before falling back to sleep. But she looked in the doorway of my room and saw a very large black blob. It was about the height of the doorway itself, so about 7 feet in height. It did not move or make a noise. She said that she was very scared and just pretended like it wasn't real and eventually fell back asleep. I told her not to worry and that I had lived here my whole life and had never seen anything strange. So she must have just been seeing things. But that was not the case for much longer. After she had been there for about a week, we both began seeing things we could not understand. I started doing some Bible studies with her there, and I was quite confident that I could debunk her religious beliefs. Little did I know that every time I participated, it started to make a change in me. The more I thought about it, the more happenings occurred in the house. The very first thing I saw was a large white blob floating across the room, almost thick in texture. It moved very slowly throughout the room, but for some reason, instead of having a scared or bad reaction to it, I felt happy, even euphoric. I explained the event to Crystal, and she said it sounded like that thing that she saw. But the one that she had seen was dark and made her very scared. A couple of weeks had passed, and it seemed like the beings were getting more intense and more reoccurring. There were different feelings with each sighting, either very good or very bad. One time, while in my kitchen in the evening, I went to go towards the hallway, which led to my bedroom. And I very clearly saw the torso of a woman's body float by. It was dressed in a very vibrant, old red dress. It was so vivid that I could make out every detail. I was so startled by the event that I ran into my parents and Crystal to make sure that none of them were wearing red. And sure enough, none of them were. One afternoon, Crystal and I were hanging out in my room when she saw a young man walk right through the room, all dressed in white clothes that were about a century old in design. I didn't see this because my back was turned to the boy. She said that he walked by, that he was smiling at her and then vanished through the wall. She told me that she wasn't scared and that it actually made her happy and did not want to scare whatever it was away. Then, one night, around midnight, while watching TV in my room, when everyone else in the house was sleeping, I decided to go get a snack in the kitchen. This was not out of the ordinary for me. I had done this almost every night in the past with nothing strange ever happening. I walked through the hall and stepped into the kitchen. As soon as I stepped foot through the kitchen, I was overcome with an overwhelming sense of fear and dread that it tingled throughout my entire body. I turned on the light to see what was going on, and there was nothing there. The fear and dread went away, and I continued with my snack preparation. As I was doing so, I felt as if there was something in the room behind me. The feeling returned stronger than before, and I quickly turned around to see what was there, not expecting to see anything. I just thought that I was a little creeped out, which in itself was very unusual. As I turned around, I saw what was there. It was an outline of a person, but in an energy form I could make out clearly. The arms, legs, and head of the entity were clearly see-through. It just stood there, looking at me, not moving. I could not move myself, for I was paralyzed with fear. It went on for what felt like hours, but in reality, it was just a minute or so. It started coming at me while I was still paralyzed. When it went through me, I felt ice-cold energy go throughout my body. Just then, I had an image in my head of Jesus, and the only thing I could think to do was command the being out of my house in the name of Jesus. I was yelling at the top of my lungs, somehow not waking everyone else up in the house. I told it that it was my house, and it's not welcome. Immediately after doing this, the fear and dread was gone, and everything was peaceful. I hoped that this was the end of the events in my house, but I was wrong. One evening, my parents were out, and Crystal and I had decided to have a Bible study with our friend Steph. Halfway through the study, we began to hear a faint whistling in the living room at the other end of the apartment. We all stopped to listen, thinking it was the TV on, but we can hear the lower than the whistling and change between commercials. It was an old work tune that we did not recognize. We all were amazed at what we were hearing. The noise got louder and louder. It went on for about 5 minutes, going between the living room and the kitchen, and then suddenly, it stopped. At that very moment, we all heard a deep, loud voice say, "Go." We all panicked at what we had just experienced. My parents arrived home shortly after, and we told them about what happened. The only thing that we could figure is it was good and bad spirits battling in the apartment, because she was religious and was trying to convince me about the Christian faith. I am now Christian because of different events that had happened, which is another story. But thank you for listening. I hope you all enjoy. In 2000, my family got back together and moved into a gorgeous house in North Walpole, New Hampshire. I remember the first night there. I remember the house felt very different than any other place I had lived in. It felt very crowded, like a whole bunch of people were living there, but it was just the 4 of us. I remember the house smelled really good, like flowers. And I always thought it was some fancy cleaner the landlord used to clean the house before we moved in. But every now and then, for the 4 years we've lived there, we would smell these flowers, and we never had flowers. One night, probably after a year of living there, my sister and I were trying to go to sleep, for it was a school night. Outside our bedroom was a huge room that was connected to 2 other rooms with hard floors. And my sister and I heard what sounded like a woman in heels walking across the floor. Nobody in the house owned a pair of heels at the time, so it was really weird. The walking continued for about a minute. We didn't know what it was. Later that year, I had won a camera from a school fundraiser, and it was one of those that required a roll of film. I took random pictures with it. I took pictures of the rooms and the trees outside. When I got the film back, after getting them developed, I was going through the pictures and I came across one in particular that made everyone's hair on their arms stand up. It was a picture of the trees I took, and there was a woman, dressed in old-fashioned dress and apron. Her hair was in a bun, and it looked like she was turning her head to look at me as I took the picture. The woman in the picture was dark, and I couldn't see her face, but I saw the bun in her hair. It was crazy. Later that year, when my sister and I were at school and my mom was at work, my dad was alone in the house. He was in the kitchen doing the dishes when he heard somebody yell, "Hey, Dad!" He walked into the living room thinking that's where the voice had come from and realized that he was alone. Another weird incident happened a year or so later. My dad had just picked up my sister and me from school. We had a van at the time with the sliding doors, and whenever we would go somewhere, someone strong would have to close the back sliding door. My sister wouldn't because she slammed her thumb in it once and refused to shut it ever again. So, We get home and I get out of the passenger seat and my sister and dad are already out. No one had shut the sliding door yet, so I went to do it. But before I could, my dad says, "Hey, thanks." I said, "For what?" And he said, "For shutting the door." I tell him that I didn't do it, and we just looked at each other with confused faces, because no one shut the door. Finally, before we moved out, the summer of 2004, my sister and I were riding our bikes outside, and I stopped and noticed the lady from my picture was in our room window. That was the creepiest house I had ever lived in besides the one I am living in now. I believe the ghost of our landlord's mother was haunting the house in North Walpole because she had died a long time ago and they lived there. I always wonder if that house is still haunted and if the people living there now have seen or heard anything strange. Ghouls, I hope you enjoyed this one. It was on the longer side, and I know you ghouls like longer videos. It's just so hard for me to make longer videos with all the crap that I have to do outside of YouTube, like mommy stuff and wife stuff and teacher stuff. It's but I really do enjoy making longer videos, so I'm going to try to manage my time a little bit better to be able to get longer videos out for you ghouls. Also, quick question. Would you ghouls be interested in me doing Vlogoween, which is basically vlogging and or making a video for every single day in October? And I want to know because that way I can, try to pre-record videos so I'm not super stressed out about it. But if I would do that, it would probably be short videos or vlogs. We'll see. We'll see how it goes, because I have a thing up on Twitter right now, and it is Wednesday right now. So we'll see how that goes. Let me know in the comments if you would like that. Vlogoween. It sounds fun. Also, someone pointed out last week, Friday's video didn't have a question of the day. Monday's video didn't have a question of the day, not Friday's. Fuck. The question is, what is your favorite word? Like, what word do you absolutely love to just say? I love the word and saying the word chlorofluorocarbons. You know, the shit in your refrigerator, the chlorofluorocarbons? I don't know why, it's just so fun to say. So let me know in the comments what your favorite word is, man. Your favorite word to say, or your favorite word to spell, or whatever. Just let me know your favorite word. But as always, the last video will be on the top left. The next video is on the bottom left. All my social medias are on the screen, as well as in the description box below. And remember, there's always someone or something watching you.